From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Maureen Corrigan, the book critic for NPR's Fresh Air and also a regular reviewer for The Washington Post. Thank you. I'm going to get on and off really fast because I know who you're here to see, and I'm just going to tell you a few things that you probably already know. Christopher Paolini is what's known as a phenom in the world of sports and publishing. His first work of fantasy, Aragon, published when he was only 19 years old, debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list, and then spent 21 weeks in the number 1 spot. His 4 novels collectively have sold more than 33 million copies worldwide. Dragons have been very kind to Christopher Paolini. According to a recent profile in Rolling Stone magazine, Mr. Paolini not only writes about dragons, he lives with them. He has in his home, among other things, a dragon lamp, a dragon mirror, a dragon coffee table, and a dragon head outside the door to his room. Christopher Paolini's latest dragon-haunted novel is called Inheritance, and it's my great pleasure to welcome him to the book festival.
Well, first of all, thank you for that lovely introduction, and I want to thank you all for being here today. It's a real honor to be at the National Book Festival. This is my very first time here, and I gotta say I'm having a lot of fun. So I think I met most of you during the signing already. That very, very fast signing. So this is nice to be able to have a little more time to talk about the books and hopefully answer some of your questions. It's a real treat for me to be here, not only because I haven't been here before, but because I spent over 10 years working on the Inheritance cycle, and to have it finally done, and to have the last book out there, and to know that people can read it and experience the story as a whole, the way that I always wanted them to experience it, means a lot to me. And what I want to do today is to talk a little bit about how I got into writing and reading, how I wrote the series, what writing each of the books was like, and ultimately talk a little bit about the last book and future plans. And hopefully I can tell you some funny stories along the way and I won't bore you too badly. If I do, you can tell me and I'll start doing handstands up here. I might do handstands anyway, we'll see. So this journey of writing these books has been transformative, to say the least. I started writing, of course, when I was 15, and you might think to yourself, okay, you know, he started writing when he was 15, and now he's a published author. Well, he's always enjoyed reading and writing. Now, the truth is that when I was very young, and my mom was teaching me how to read, I absolutely hated reading. In fact, I went up to my mom one time and I said, I hate to read. I'm never going to use it the rest of my life. In her infinite wisdom, my mom didn't listen to me. And she kept teaching me, and she kept teaching me how to read, which included a very traumatic experience where I had to stand up in front of the whole family and read Green Eggs and Ham to everyone, which is still burned in my head. I do not like green eggs and ham, said Sam I Am. But even though she kept teaching me how to read, I never loved reading. I never loved reading up until I went to the public library where we were living, and this was back in 1990, and we were living in Anchorage, Alaska back then. And we went to the public library, and Alaska's a really neat place. You know, the sun comes up at midnight, basically, in the summertime, and it barely rises at all in the wintertime. And the mosquitoes are the size of small birds, and they chase you in giant black clouds that sound like jet fighters. And if they catch you, they suck every last ounce of blood out of your body. Nice place, though. So I'm in the public library, and I'm going around in the children's section. And in the children's section, I found this series of very thin children's detective novels. and they had bright covers and interesting titles. So I pulled one off and I checked it out. And it was the very first book I ever checked out on my own. And when I started reading it, for whatever reason, it was as if a switch just got flipped inside my head. And all of a sudden, instead of just seeing the words on the page, I could actually see the things that they represented. So instead of seeing the word sunset, I could see a sunset in my head, and I could hear what the characters were saying, and I could smell the locations. Unfortunately, it's been so long that I don't actually remember what the book was called, but I do remember that the story involved tomato sauce being mistaken for blood, which seemed very exciting to me as an 8-year-old boy. And when I was reading this, that's when I really fell in love with reading. And to me, the ability of literature to take us to different places, take us to places we've never been before, and to let us get inside other people's heads, to me, that's the closest thing to true magic that we have in the world today. So from that moment on, I read everything I could get my hands on. I read fantasy, I read non-fantasy, I read lots of folk tales. And of course, eventually, I read all of the fantasy in our local library, which was very, very small. And since I wasn't too smart as a kid, once I'd read all the fantasy, I thought, well, I've read all the fantasy there is. There's nothing more. Which was a horrible feeling because I loved fantasy. And so I was thinking, oh man, I guess I better try writing some of it. At this point, I'd actually graduated from high school. I graduated at 15, mainly the result of not taking any summer breaks my entire life. Thank you, Mom. And at first when I graduated, my first thought was, oh, well, this is going to be awesome. No more school. And it was awesome for about 2 weeks. And then I got really, really, really bored. I got so bored that I went to our backyard and I started to dig a hole. It was a big hole, too. It was about 9 feet deep. And it was about 10 feet across. It was circular. And then once I dug that, we had one of those big old satellite dishes, the really big ones, and it was abandoned on our property. So I dragged it over to the pit, and I tipped it over the hole, so the satellite dish formed a ceiling, a roof, for the hole. And then I piled hay bales, because I live in Montana, so there are lots of hay bales. So I piled hay bales on top of the satellite dish for insulation. And then I shingled the hay bales with pieces of dead bark that I ripped off of trees by the Yellowstone River. Now, you might be wondering with all of that, the satellite dish, the hay bales, the pieces of bark, you might be wondering how I actually got into the hole. Well, I dug a tunnel into the hole. And then I built an entryway for the tunnel. And then I started chopping down dead trees along the Yellowstone River, chopping them down with a claw hammer, I might add. And I dragged them up to the hole and I planted them upright in the ground in front of the entryway to form the framework for what was going to be a Viking-style mead hall. Now, when you start digging giant holes and building Viking-style mead halls in your backyard, you are officially bored. And I realized that I had to find something else to do with myself aside from digging holes, as much as I enjoyed that. And the thing is I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't in school. I didn't have a job. I didn't drive, and the nearest town was over a half-hour drive away. So I couldn't just pop down to the nearest bookstore or mall. I mean, we don't have a mall. So I had to find some way to entertain myself. And the thing is I think that everyone ought to have this opportunity at least once in your life where you don't have to do anything. And whatever it is you choose to do in that time when no one's forcing you to do anything, that's probably what you should pursue as a profession. Whether it's playing video games or making video games or digging holes or math or engineering or just even being with other people, that's what you should probably pursue as a career. And in my case, of course, as I said, it was writing fantasy. And I decided I wanted to take all the things I loved about fantasy. You know, the magic sword and the wise old mentor and the evil villain and the dragon and the young hero and the elves and the dwarves. And I wanted to put them all into one story, and as a way of paying tribute to the books that I loved, and as a way to sort of put my own stamp on the genre and say, this is my version of this very classic coming-of-age story. So I spent about a month, and I plotted out the entire plot, the entire story of the Inheritance cycle. Of course, back then it was the Inheritance trilogy. I've been told I'm the only person to write a trilogy in 4 parts, so... but I can blame that on my last book just being too big. I had to split it into 2. In any case, I plotted out the whole series, and once I knew what was going to happen pretty much at all the major events in the story, that's when I finally started to write Aragon. And it was a lot of fun. You know, I just raced through the book, and I wasn't worrying about editing or anything. I just told the story. And when I finished, I sat down and read it through for the first time. And that was even more exciting, you know, getting to read your own book for the first time. It was horrible. It was awful. The story was there, but the writing itself needed a lot of help. So I said, okay, I'm going to try to fix this. And just to give you an idea of how bad that first draft was, I never used to tell people this because I was so ashamed of it. But in the very first draft of Aragon, Aragon wasn't named Aragon. Aragon was named Kevin. Now, if your name is Kevin, it's a perfectly good name. But I don't think these books would have been half so popular if they'd been about the adventures of the great dragon rider, Kevin. So I decided I'm going to fix it. And I rewrote the book. I kept the story, but fleshed out the dialogue, the characters, the places, and obviously renamed Kevin to Aragon. I also added a small character that some of you might be familiar with, known as Angela the Herbalist, who I actually based on my sister, Angela. And yes, that is exactly what she is like. And yes, she has a very good sense of humor about all of it, or else I wouldn't be standing here right now. Just as an example, that whole story, that argument about frogs and toads from the first book, I didn't make that up. She had that argument with her uncle at one point, our uncle. And just for the record, all toads are frogs, but not all frogs are toads, just to settle that. So I rewrote the book, and when I finished, I gave it to my parents, and I asked them to read it. And fortunately for me, they liked it enough that we decided we were going to self-publish it and take it around the country and see what happened. And that's exactly what we did. I traveled all across the western half of the United States doing presentations in schools and libraries, much like I'm doing now. Although back then, I did all of my events while dressed in medieval costume. It was a kind of a cool costume, too. And kind of dorky, too. It was black, knee-high, lace-up leather boots, billowy black pantaloons, a big black pirate belt, a billowy red swordsman shirt, and a black beret to top it all off. Now, the very first presentation I did was in our local high school. Again, I was homeschooled, so I'd never been in the high school before. I was 17, and I walked in dressed like that. And they had almost the entire school gathered in the library for my first presentation. I walk in costume, and from the back of the room, I heard some guy say, "Hello, Romeo!" As you can see, I don't wear that costume anymore. Still, I had a great time traveling around, and I met a lot of great people. Eventually, another author, the author Carl Hyacin, who wrote a great young adult book called Hoot, that some of you might be familiar with. Yeah? Well, he comes up to Montana to fly fish and vacation and all that, and while he was up there, he bought a copy of the self-published edition of Aragon for his then 12-year-old son, Ryan. And Ryan read it, and he liked it enough that his dad passed it on to Random House, and eventually Random House came to me. And I love this story because, to me, it really demonstrates how readers can really change the world, no matter what your age is. If Ryan hadn't read that book, and if he hadn't said that he liked the book, and none of this would have happened. I wouldn't be talking with you right here, right now. So readers really can change the world, even if it doesn't always seem like it. So Random House came to me. We republished Aragon in the format you're now familiar with it. And then eventually, of course, I wrote Eldest, and then Brissinger, and now finally Inheritance. And with each of the books along the way, I had a great time and some great experiences. It's always funny to me, stuff that happens while touring or preparing to tour. For example, right before I went on the book tour for Eldest, I was at home, I was packing for my trip. Well, I was supposed to be packing. I was actually playing video games. I was playing a video game which is now quite old, but it was a lot of fun. It was a video game called Jedi Knight Academy 2, which was some of the best lightsaber fighting you'll ever find in a game. And I was logged into the internet, and I was fighting people from all around the world. And in the middle of the game, someone logged into the forum using the name Aragon. And I said to myself, oh, I've got to fight this guy. So I went over, and I challenged him to a duel, and he accepted, and we fought. Now, I was pretty good back then. But the problem was he was better than me. And the horrible thing is he beat me. And across the screen it said, "You have been killed by Aragon." And then, let's see, with Brissinger, I was in Chicago doing a signing there. A young woman came up to me, and she was on her arm, it was late in the signing, and on her arm, she was carrying a sugar glider. Now, for those of you who don't know, a sugar glider is kind of like a flying squirrel, but they're marsupials, and they have big eyes, and they're very, very, very cute. So I looked at her and I said, well, that's an interesting animal. Do you mind if I pet it? Yeah, you can just see where this is going, can't you? And she said, oh, sure, go right ahead. He loves strangers. So I reached out and I started petting the sugar glider, and it looked up at me, and ever so politely, it wrapped its fingers around my finger, because they have hands like raccoons. And it looked up at me again. And then it began to gnaw on my finger. And I was sitting there with blood running down my hand, saying, will you please stop your pet from trying to eat me? Of course, I'm kind of glad it happened because I'm now one of the few people in the world who can say that I have been chewed on by a marsupial. There are very few people outside of Australia who can say that. And then with Inheritance, during the last week of work on the book and on the entire series, I was in New York City, going into Random House to do the last bit of edits and stuff. And during that last week of work, New York City got hit by both an earthquake and a hurricane. And I remember my editor came to me and she said, Christopher, I love you dearly, but you really, really have to finish this series before any more natural disasters occur. So finish it I did, and I've been very happy to have it done and happy to be touring around the world with the book. In fact, recently, I just came back from an international tour, and I got another couple good stories from there. I won't tell all of them, but I'll tell you this one. I had a young woman in Barcelona come to one of my signings. She came up to me, and she asked if I would sign her arm. She didn't have a book, so I said, okay. I signed her arm with a Sharpie. She showed up to my next signing the next day, and she'd had my signature tattooed onto her arm. Now, I say this not to give you ideas. More as a warning, actually. But in any case, it's been a great fun, great adventure. And I'd like to do something now. I do want to take some quick questions from you guys, but before we get to that, there's something I want to do that I have wanted to do for years, but it's only become possible since Inheritance was published. And what I want to do is I want to read you guys a very short excerpt from each of the 4 books. Is that something you want to hear? Yeah? I have to apologize, my voice is giving out a little. I was talking so much at the signing, so we'll see if my voice holds up. All right, I don't actually have any books up here with me, so who's got a copy of Aragon that I can borrow? Whoever gets it to me first. Okay. Now, as I said, this is going to be very short, very, very short. I'm going to read you the very first line of the very first chapter of the very first book of the Inheritance Cycle. So here goes. Wind howled through the night, carrying a scent that would change the world. Thank you. Okay, so we've got eldest. Now, as some of you know, one of the things I did while creating the series is I created a couple of languages for the book, for the series. And the main one, of course, and I really enjoyed doing this. And the main one is the ancient language, the elf language. And I based it partially off of Old Norse, which I think gives it a nice sound and feel. And I'm going to read you the Elvish blessing in the ancient language from the second book. However, I have to apologize because I have an atrocious Elvish accent. And that's mainly because in the ancient language, you're supposed to roll your R's on the tip of your tongue the way you would with Spanish or Italian. And I can't do that. In fact, the only way I can roll my R's, and I apologize because I know this sounds terribly obscene, but the only way I can roll my R's is by wiggling my uvula. That's the thing in the back of your throat. So I'm going to wiggle my uvula at you guys, and I hope you like it too. Atra sternion felduin, maraner lief unin harta owner, undu everinia onovarda. Now that said, my favorite of the languages is actually the dwarf language because I invented it from scratch, and it just has a great sound and feel. And unlike the ancient language, I have an excellent dwarvish accent. And that's because in Dwarvish, you are supposed to roll your R's by wiggling your uvula. So, let the wiggling commence. Form Rethkarach, form Jürgen Karmiter, Noseta Gorath Bastardag, Durin Sesti Rakkithen, Yok Iswarv Aj Barzulagor, Dur Durgrimst Aj Schwelden Rak Anuen, Mog Tor Rak Jürgenvren. As you might imagine, dwarves are usually very hoarse, and no one much likes listening to their love poems. Okay. I'm now going to read you okay, Brissinger. As you might imagine, Brissinger it's a big book, as you can see, and it has a lot of sentences in it, as all big books do. So, out of all these sentences, though, I have some that are my particular favorites. There's one that involves a bombulating bumblebee, which I'm very fond of. I probably should have cut it, but I couldn't bring myself to. But out of all these many, many sentences that make up this very, very big book, I want to read you my absolutely favorite sentence. I think it's just exceptionally well written. I think it has a lot of literary value, and I hope you'll agree with me. So, are you ready to hear my favorite sentence? Yeah. Die, puny human! Because really, what is the point of writing fantasy if you can't write lines like, die, puny human, every now and then? Oh, look at that, this book is signed. I wonder how that happened. Now, this is a little bit longer. And unfortunately, my voice really is giving out a little bit, so I'm not sure I can get through all this, but we'll see. This is the very end of the very first chapter of the very last book, and if you've not read book 4, rest assured, no spoilers. So, here goes. The sound was stabbing, slicing, shivering, like metal scraping against stone. Aragon's teeth vibrated in sympathy, and he covered his ears with his hands, grimacing as he twisted around, trying to locate the source of the noise. Saphira tossed her head, and even through the din, he heard her whine in distress. Aragon swept his gaze over the courtyard 2 separate times before he noticed a faint puff of dust rising up the wall of the keep from a foot-wide crack that had appeared beneath the blackened, partially destroyed window where Blodgarm had killed the magician. As the squeal increased in intensity, Aragon risked lifting one of his hands off his ears to point at the crack. "Look!" he shouted to Arya, who nodded in acknowledgement. He replaced his hand over his ear. Without warning or preamble, the sound stopped. Aragon waited for a moment, then slowly lowered his hands, for once wishing that his hearing was not quite so sensitive. Just as he did, the crack jerked open wider, spreading until it was several feet across, and raced down the wall of the keep. Like a bolt of lightning, the crack struck and shattered the keystone above the doors to the building, showering the floor below with pebbles. The whole castle groaned, and from the damaged window to the broken keystone, the front of the keep began to lean outward. "Run!" Aragon shouted at the Varden, though the men were already scattering to either side of the courtyard, desperate to get out from under the precarious wall. Aragon took a single step forward, every muscle in his body tense as he searched for a glimpse of Roran somewhere in the throng of warriors. At last, Aragon spotted him, trapped behind the last group of men by the doorway, bellowing madly at them, his words lost in the commotion. Then the wall shifted and dropped several inches, leaning even further away from the rest of the building, pelting Roran with rocks, knocking him off balance, and forcing him to stumble backward under the overhang of the doorway. As Roran straightened from a crouch, his eyes met Aragon's, and in his gaze, Aragon saw a flash of fear and helplessness, quickly followed by resignation, as if Roran knew that no matter how fast he ran, he could not possibly reach safety in time. A wry smile touched Roran's lips, and the wall fell. Thank you. I apologize for giving you a horrible workout with all those invented names and languages. Does he live? Does he die? Read chapter 2. I would love to try to answer as many of your questions as we have time for now. So we have a microphone here, we have a microphone there. I just ask you to keep in mind, if you have read book 4, there are some people here who haven't. So let's try not to talk about who lives and who dies. We'll leave that for the internet comment boards. Yes. Do I like the movie adaptation?
Oh, worst movies ever! One of the worst movies ever.
Well, let me put it this way. I'm very glad that the movie was made because very few books ever get made into movies. And I offered as much input as I could into the making of the film, but ultimately the film reflects the studio and the director's vision of the story, just as the books reflect my vision of the story. And everyone's free to enjoy them on their own terms. However, it did bring a lot of new people into the series, and who knows, maybe we'll get a remake of the first one someday. I will say this, I was actually supposed to have a cameo in the film, but it didn't work out because I was touring for Eldest. But I was going to fly over, and I asked for this, and they agreed. I was going to appear in the last battle of the film, and I was going to get my head chopped off by Aragon. It was only a few years later that I realized that in order to get my head chopped off by Aragon, they would have had to dress me up as an Urgle. And I probably would have made the shortest Urgle ever. But it still would have been fun. So, oh, I also forgot to mention, in further book-related news, there is a deluxe edition of Inheritance coming out next month, which has deleted scenes, extra art from both me and John Jude Palancar, who did the cover, and a sneak peek of some things that happen after the end of the story. And if I say anything more than that, I'll spoil it for you, so I won't, but it's very, very, very cool. Just so you know. Yes?
In the future, are you going to write any new books on, like, maybe the second series of the Inheritance cycle to tell us what happens after the big war? When Aragon trains all those.
Your first taste of public shaming, isn't it something? No. It's first of all, for those of you who've read book 4, you'll probably have noticed there are some questions I did not answer in the book. Those are the foundation for book 5. However, I spent from 1998 until last year working on this series. I need a break. So I'm actually going to write some other things first. I'm working on some science fiction right now. I also want to write some stories in other different genres, and hopefully you'll enjoy each of those books as much or more than the Inheritance cycle. Long term, though, yes, book 5. You've met the main character already. You will meet some of the same characters, also new characters. There will be lots of surprises. The only thing I'll tell you about it is that you'll learn more about the backstory of Angela the herbalist. But seriously, if I tell you anything more, I'll have to take you all home with me and lock you in my basement for the next few years. And you seem all very nice people, but I don't want to have to feed you for that long. Yes?
What got you interested in dragons? What got you interested in dragons?
What got me interested in dragons? Dragons are cool! I really liked dinosaurs growing up, and dragons are like dinosaurs plus. You know, they've got scales, they can fly, and they can breathe fire. And if you have one as a friend, they're always there to help you. They can hear your thoughts, and they can eat anyone you don't like. As far as I'm concerned, that's the best friend ever.
Thanks. Since a lot of important stuff happens in Aragon, was it easy or hard to think of what happens next in the second book?
Great question. If I sit down to write without knowing what happens next, I get instant writer's block. So for me, it's like music. It's very hard to compose a piece of music while you perform it. So first you compose it, and then you can concentrate on performing it as beautifully as possible. And that's exactly what writing is. Writing is a performance, and plotting something out beforehand gives you the framework and the roadmap to perform within. So I always figure things out beforehand, and the way I do that is I get a cool idea. I think, I read a book, watch a movie, and think, oh man, I wish they'd done X, Y, Z. Or I'm just walking outside and I get an idea, like, wouldn't it be cool if a young man found a dragon egg out in the middle of the forest? Okay, how do you build a story from that? Easy. You ask questions. How did the dragon egg get there? Who else would be looking for it? How would the young man find the dragon egg? What sort of a world would dragons live in? Where does the young man come from? What is his family? How do they make their living? Where do they live? Etc., 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 etc. Stories are a series of questions asked and of questions answered. And that's how I build my plots. That and variety. You want variety. It's like music. You don't want music that's always loud, and you don't want music that's always soft. You want music that gives you some loud, some soft, and varies the tempo. And that's what you want to do with your stories as well. Good question. Yes?
What was the inspiration for Aragon?
What was the inspiration for Aragon? All the fantasy I read growing up, which included Dune by Frank Herbert, the Mabinogion Tetralogy by Evangeline Walton, the Gormenghast Trilogy by Mervyn Peake, the Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Edison, the Dragon Riders of Pern series by Anne McCaffrey, Lord of the Rings, Memory Sorrow, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams, David Eddings, Magician and Sequels by Raymond E. Feist, A Wizard of Earthsea and Sequels by Ursula K. Le Guin, The Pink Dragon Trilogy by Jane Yolen, The Mossflower series by Brian Jakes, and I'm running out of breath. Specifically, though, my inspiration was a book called Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher by Bruce Coville. And by the way, I met Bruce, and he looks like Sean Connery. And he's very cool. But anyway, it's about a young man in this world who goes into an old beat-up shop and buys a stone that ends up hatching a dragon. And I love that idea so much of a young man finding a dragon egg and raising the dragon that I started asking those the questions I just mentioned, like what sort of a world would a dragon come from? You know, how would the dragon egg get there, and so on. So that's my inspiration, and that's where it all came from. Yes?
Besides asking questions, what would be your best advice for young aspiring authors and writers?
Okay, here goes. This is gonna be a long answer. 1, read. Good writers are good readers. Read as much as you can. Read what you love to read, but also read things you don't like to read because you'll learn a lot from that as well. 2, write every single day. Write. Persistence is the biggest talent any author can have. The more you write, the better you'll get. Don't wait for inspiration. I write every single day. I write on weekends. I write on holidays. I write on my birthday. The only day I take off is Christmas. Write every single day unless you're in the hospital, and if you're conscious and functioning, you should still be writing even if you're in the hospital. 3, learn everything you can about the English language or whatever language you're writing in. That's the tool of the trade, and the better you understand it, the better you understand grammar, the better you can get what's in your head onto the page into someone else's head. I know grammar is boring, but seriously, you need to own those gerunds. You need to understand those gerunds. You need to embrace those gerunds, and then don't use them. Unless you need to. And seriously, passive tense is not the worst thing in the world. Unless you're conscious of it. 4, find someone in your life, teacher, family member, librarian, someone who's a good reader and who can look at your work and edit it and tell you what you've done wrong. Again, music. It's very hard to hear when you sing a bad note. You need a voice coach to tell you when you hit bad notes. That's what editing is for writers. I know it's painful, but I guarantee you will learn more from editing than you ever will from actually writing. Lastly, well, 2 things. Also, I'd recommend plotting your story out beforehand. Works for me, doesn't work for everyone, but it works for me. And most importantly, write about whatever it is you care about the most. Writing is hard. Writing can be very hard, but if you truly care about the subject material, that'll get you through the rough spots. And don't let anyone else tell you what you should or shouldn't write. You want to write about flying toasters and singing unicorns? Go for it! There are, 6, 7 some billion people on this planet. I guarantee that whatever you're interested in, someone else is interested in it as well. And of course, again, don't give up. And try to have fun. You don't have to have fun all the time, but try to have fun more days than you don't. Long answer to a short question. Hope it was of some interest. And get the book Story by Robert McKee. Very useful. Yes?
How did you choose the name Aragon, and why did you choose a male main character instead of a female main character?
2 great questions, and one of which I've never been asked before. 1, where did I get the name Aragon? Well, a lot of my names come from wordplay. So Aragon is dragon with the first letter changed from D to E. And it also means an era gone by, an era past, which I thought was very fitting for the story I was telling. Aragon. Sapphira is a play on sapphire, and so on. The other question was, why did I make Aragon a boy and not a girl? For that, my only defense is that when I was 15, I was a 15-year-old boy, and putting myself in the head of a 15-year-old girl was just not something I could do at the time. That said, most of my upcoming stories, not all of them, but, well, actually, some of the stories that I'm planning on writing fairly soon all have female main characters. I think there is a real lack of good, strong female main characters in fantasy at the moment. And that's been changing, but it's something I think still needs to be addressed. So hopefully I can at least take a stab at it, and my sister will tell me when I go horribly wrong. Good question. Yes?
Did you ever think that you would get this far? Like, did you finish Aragon and go, this is great, I hope people will like it a lot?
Never.
Woo!
Never. Did I ever think I'd get this far, or did I ever think, oh, Aragon's great? Never. Let me put it this way. If you're a writer and you start thinking that you're good, stop writing, because you won't ever get any better. I have learned a lot about writing from all this, but I never expected this to happen, and I'll tell you, it wasn't until Brissinger was published that I actually felt like an author, and it wasn't until Inheritance came out that I actually felt like I could relax a little and like, okay, yeah, this might actually be a career. The problem is that art is subjective, and what I like, someone else may not like, and what you like, I may not like. And so you guys may not like my future books. I think you will, but there's always a chance you won't. And unless you're able to live with that uncertainty, you probably don't want to be a professional author. But you have to embrace it if you're going to, because that's just part of the experience. Yes?
Are you planning on writing about the original Aragon or the Fall of the Riders?
I've thought about doing some prequels, but I'm a little wary of it because everyone would know what would happen. I have thought that one of the things I would like to do maybe someday is write a book about Brahm. Always thought that would work well, but we'll see. Maybe someday. Maybe someday. Who's your favorite Doctor?
Oh, probably David Tennant.
David Tennant. Okay, good answer.
So, as a Whovian, I was reading the books and I noticed a lot of things like stuff that could be related, like rooms that are bigger on the inside, lonely god. I was wondering if those were intentional, and maybe if Angela was somehow related to a Time Lord.
My pet theory is that Angela actually is a Time Lord. She isn't, but that's my pet theory. Oh, it's all intentional. I mean, you're talking to a guy who literally gets into 15-minute arguments with editors over single commas. Right, Michelle? Yes. So, no, it's all intentional. Yes, I'm a big Doctor Who fan. I would love to write an episode for the show someday. I think it's a great character, and I love how the new series, especially with David Tennant and Christopher Eccleston, really evoked a sense of wonder and awe and adventure. And so I wanted to pay tribute to that, and I'm now very proud that I'm now listed on Wikipedia on the main Doctor Who page or something as, you know, references in other media or something like that. So yes, it was all intentional.
Thank you.
How long does it take you to write a book, and what is book 5 called?
What is book 5 called? I have the title and I can't tell you. How long does it take to write a book? It depends. I've written some of these books within the course of a fairly short period of time, and others have taken a lot longer. It really depends on what's going on around the writing of the book, and also how much you have figured out. I mean, if in an ideal situation, you can probably write a book the size of Inheritance between 4 to 5 months fairly comfortably, but you're writing consistently a lot every single day, and you have to know exactly what you're going to write. More comfortable is probably a year. On the other hand, Brissinger and Eldest took me more like 2.5 years to write each, so it depends.
So why does Shuriken and Fiernan
No spoilers.
I'm not saying any
Okay.
spoilers. Why do they have different color eyes than their hides from the others?
Great question. Why do Shuriken and the Green Dragon have different color eyes in their skin? In the case of Shuriken, it's because I described him that way. In the case of the Green Dragon Fiernan, it's because John Jude Paolini, who painted the covers, painted him that way. I don't know why. I think he just did it just to have some more contrast in the image. I still have to ask him about that, actually. Cool story, actually. Some of you may not know this. I named Palancar Valley, where Aragon grows up, after John Jude Palancar because I was a big fan of his. Without knowing that, and without consulting me, Random House chose him to paint the covers. So it was really nice to have him work on the series.
Can you tell us how a Mandelbrot set is connected to Book 5?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
Can you tell us how a Mandelbrot set is connected to Book 5?
Can I tell you how the Mandelbrot set is connected to Book 5? For those of you who don't follow me on Twitter, I'm on Twitter @InheritanceCP, and I tweet lots of silly things like how to shave Angora rabbits and things like that. However, I tweeted an image of the Mandelbrot fractal set saying that it was related to my next work. I did not say it was book 5. But I can't tell you. You'll find out. Yes?
Why did you have to make Aragon's uncle die?
Ooh. No. That's a very good question. Here's why. The reason that he and other characters in the series had to die is because if they had stayed alive, they would have continued to do things for Aragon because they're older than Aragon, more experienced than Aragon, and they're better at this stuff than Aragon. And the whole point of the story is that Aragon and the other younger characters have to grow up, mature, and learn to do things for themselves. So that's unfortunately why.
How did you come up with the character of Bodgarm?
How did I come up with the character of Bloodgarm? He's the elf covered in fur. I did not realize I'd put a furry in my book until after the fact. But basically, I saw a Michael Whalen painting where he had a sort of elvish character with some fur on him, and I thought, oh, that's cool, so I did that. I get a lot of inspiration from paintings. Yes?
Hi, Christopher. I'm actually from Australia and I have been gnawed on by a sugar glider, so I totally understand.
It hurts, doesn't it?
My question is, I see Arya as a very strong female character, and I was just wondering, where did you get the inspiration from as like a 15-year-old boy, like writing it? So I was really shocked when I read it that it was so well done.
Well, couple of things. One, I grew up with a lot of strong women in my family. My sister and my mom are anything but wallflowers, so that's been a big inspiration. Two, I have to give some credit where credit is due. My editor Arya was not as strong a character as she is now, in many cases, because I identified so strongly with Aragon. There were times I would slip so much into his point of view, I'd start writing about Aragon the way Aragon sees her, not the way she actually is. And every time that happened, I was very fortunate that my editor caught me on it and would say, no, bad author, bad, down. You need to fix this. And, 9 times out of 10, she was right. And it did need to be fixed. And doing so made Arya's character stronger and Aragon's character stronger. I think part of it is learning to view people and think about other people the way they see themselves and not the way the young 15-year-old guy who has the hots for the elven princess sees them.
Hi. Cheap?
Cheap.
Okay, not my question, but thought I should mention. I figure because if you're gonna answer that in book 5, maybe. My question is, there's a lot of kind of color coding in the books. Like everything that belongs to Aragon is blue, everything that belongs to Arya is green, and everyone kind of has an assigned color. Why did you do that, and how did you come up with it?
Why the assigned colors in the series? Well, one, I started as an artist before writing. I mean, I drew the dragon eye in the books. I did the maps as well. So color comes very naturally to me in that sense, and interest in it. Two, it's actually a very old idea that everyone's magic has its own unique color. You can look at Star Wars. Everyone has their own lightsaber color, right? Heaven forbid Luke has a red lightsaber. Or a purple lightsaber. That would have been fun. So no, I mean, it's just a way of emphasizing certain themes and drawing certain parallels within the story. You could certainly do without it, but I found it worked well for my story. Yes?
If you could be a rider, like what color dragon would you have?
What color dragon would I have if I was a rider? Well, I am partially colorblind. I see less red and green than most people. I do see red and green, but I see less of it. Therefore, I see pretty much exactly the way I described Saphira's vision in book 1, which means I am told that Saphira is not actually blue, she is purple. So I would have a gorgeous royal blue dragon that everyone would look at and say, wow, you've got a purple dragon, man.
Would you ever consider writing horror at any time?
Would I ever consider writing horror? That is a great question. Yes, I would. Horror is basically fantasy, scary fantasy. And in fact, in Inheritance, the 2 chapters which take place in and around Dras Leona, those of you who've read the book know what I'm talking about. I thought of those as my Stephen King chapters. and I tried to be as scary as I could. So I may write horror someday, yes.
I'm 13 and I have a book and a lot of stuff for it in my mind. I haven't gotten to write it down. Do you have any tips of how to write it and not have it become like more work than enjoying it?
Hey, if you figure it out, tell me. Part of it, as I said, is writing about things that you're really interested in and you really care about. I mean, if I get a really good idea for a story, the thing is, I love stories. Stories do things for me that only music does. Music and stories are the only two things that they touch me in ways that, get inside my mind and affect me in ways that few things do. So if I get a cool idea for a story, it's like, I have to write this. And yes, it's work at times, but I keep trying to hold on to that feeling of why I have to write the story. And that's what lets me get through the rough stuff. And planning things out beforehand helps you solve a lot of the problems before you actually sit down to write. So, best of luck.
What is your favorite book and why?
Favorite book that I've written or favorite book that I've read?
Written.
If you go chronologically, Aragon, just because it's the first book I ever wrote, and it's always going to have a soft spot in my heart, special place in my heart because of that. If you go by weight, then definitely the last book. And if you go by quality, again, I would say Inheritance. I think it's the best book I've written, and my favorite of the Inheritance cycle. My actual favorite book, however, is the one I'm working on now, and which I can't talk to you about. So, my favorite book is always the book I'm working on. Yes?
How did you come up with the Razak?
How did I come up with the Razak? Well, one night I was in my bedroom. Boy, this could go in many directions. One night I was in my bedroom and I heard, we just moved into our house and it was fairly empty, so I'm alone on my bed, everything's empty. I hear this horrible, horrible screeching sound coming from my office outside my bedroom. So I grab a flashlight, I grab a knife, and I'm going out into my office, and I'm panning the light around, hearing this horrible, horrible screeching sound. I'm going, what the heck is this? And as the light panned across my sofa, I saw this shadow on the wall behind the sofa, this huge, barbed shadow. It looked like the alien from the Alien movies was sitting on the back of my sofa. And then I heard the screeching again. There was a Jerusalem cricket sitting on the back of my sofa. Jerusalem crickets are horrible. They're the ugly cousins of grasshoppers. Just so you know the company Weta that Peter Jackson works with and does all the special effects for Lord of the Rings and stuff? Weta is a form of a Jerusalem cricket. They're giant crickets that live in New Zealand, and Peter Jackson is apparently very afraid of them and hates them so much he named his company after them. So apparently I'm not the only one who has a thing about Jerusalem crickets. So they provided the inspiration for the Razak.
I'm an aspiring writer and actually go to college studying for it, but what is your advice for finding a publisher or how to shop for publishers? And who's your favorite companion?
Who's my favorite?
Companion.
Who's my favorite Doctor Who companion? Yeesh. That's hard to say. There have been so many good ones over the years, it's kind of hard. Sarah Jane. Ultimately, I think the main thing is to concentrate on just writing a good story. If you write something that people want to read, you will find an audience, and publishers will come for you. Publishers are desperate for good stories. It's their business model. They need good books. And so if you've got something that people want to read, you're going to get a publishing deal. More people are being published nowadays than at any other time in history. And if you can't get a publishing deal, you can self-publish, sell 1 million copies, and then you'll get a publishing deal. So there are definitely ways to do it. And there are a lot of books out there on how to do it. So I'd recommend doing some research. How are we doing on time? I'm happy to keep answering questions, or do we need to wrap it up? We need to wrap it up. All right. I'm sorry I can't keep answering questions here for you, but we're out of time. However, I want to say again that I had a wonderful, wonderful time. Thank you so much for coming here. I hope you enjoy my future books. And as Aragon would say, Sioner Sverdar Sitya Havas, may your swords stay sharp. And I'm going to unplug the mic here and do something that I always do at the end of my events.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.